Urban exploring is one thing when you're sneaking into old motels and abandoned train yards, places that have been sitting empty for decades, but when you know somebody else has been inside, I'm talking recently, when you know something chased your friends out the last time they went, it stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling more like a mistake. But of course, I found myself going anyway. It was a strip mall, abandoned for at least the last 10 years, long enough for the city to just really forget about it, for nature to start reclaiming the parking lot with creeping weeds and cracked asphalt. My friends had been inside before, stalking through its dead storefronts and looted back rooms. But the last time they went, something wasn't right. They heard a bunch of noises, heavy footsteps echoing from deep inside, and not animals and not the wind, but something moving in the dark, something human. They knew because they could hear laughing and smell cigarettes. And for some reason, they wanted to go back. They hadn't made it all the way through the last time, so they want to push deeper to find out what was really inside. And I was dumb enough to let them drag me along with them. We showed up just before sunset, sky bleeding orange and red behind the skeletal remains of the old shopping center. The whole place had that feel of something that had been left behind, forgotten. Boards over windows, faded signs hanging loose, doorways clogged up with cinder blocks. The parking lot was mostly bare, just a few rusted out cars sitting like corpses, stripped for parts over the years. "Told you it's still open," Wes said, motioning towards the usual entry point. A collapsed entry near what used to be a grocery store. "Nobody's sealed it up yet." "Well, that's probably because nobody cares about this place," Cody muttered, kicking a loose rock across the pavement. I didn't respond, just looked up at that gaping entrance, at the dark beyond, and wondered how much I actually really wanted to do this. I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous in the moment, scared. None of us knew what could happen once we get inside. But they were already moving, stepping over debris and slipping in, so I followed behind. The first thing that hit me, which is pretty usual in places like this, is the smell. Stale air, water damage, decay, the kind of smell that sticks to a place when it's been left for dead. We moved slow at first, flashlights slicing off through the dark, illuminating shattered tile floors, overturned shelves, and walls, of course, covered in graffiti. A decade long of vandalism had left its mark. Holes punched inside drywall, clear evidence of squatters, and the occasional melted puddle of candle wax where somebody had spent the night. But the deeper we went, the quieter it seemed to get, and the more weird it really felt. I tried to ignore that feeling creeping up my spine, but I couldn't shake the thought. If something scared them out there before, when they were here last time, was it still here? Still waiting? We moved deeper, stepping carefully over debris. The first section of the strip mall looked like every other abandoned place that we'd been to before. Ruined, trashed, forgotten. Taggers had done their work, covering the walls in layers and layers of spray-painted nonsense. Old merchandise racks were overturned, their contents long picked clean by looters. "Still looks the same to me," Cody said, and that thought wasn't really reassuring. We passed through what must have been a clothing store, its floor covered in shredded fabric and bits of insulation. Beyond that, an electronics shop, the walls stripped of shelves and counters flipped onto their sides. Telling you, the deeper we went, the worse it would get. The smell of mildew grew stronger and stronger, and the air thickened with something stale, like the place had a bad cavity. Then we heard a shuffling noise, and the three of us froze. The sound was faint, coming from somewhere ahead, past the empty storefronts and deeper inside the mall. Cody flicked off his flashlight, and Wes and I did the same. We just stood there in the darkness, listening. We heard the noise again. It was getting closer. I felt the pulse in my throat. We're not alone. Wes moved first, crouching low behind a toppled display case, and Cody and I followed, staying low with our breath held tight in our chest. The sounds continued, these slow, muffled footsteps moving throughout the wreckage. Not an animal and not the wind. People. From the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the overhead windows, I caught movement, a shadow shifting against the darkness. There were at least 2 of them, maybe more. Cody leaned in close. "We gotta go, now." Wes hesitated though. What if they're just squatters? I swallowed, keeping my eyes locked on those dark figures ahead of us. Squatters wouldn't be a surprise, but why were they moving like that, so slow and careful? Another sound, but it wasn't a footstep. A soft, wet cough from somewhere deeper in the mall. And Wes didn't argue anymore. We waited until the figures moved a little deeper into the shadows and took our chance. What I hadn't realized was that Cody meant deeper when he said go now, and I thought he meant go back. How naive I was. One by one, we slipped out of our hiding spot, creeping toward a hallway that branched off from the main concourse. We moved quickly, keeping our footsteps light and pushing deeper into the building. It was stupid, I know, and we should have just turned back. We ran until we couldn't hear footsteps anymore, until all we could hear was our own breathing and our own pounding hearts. The hallway that we found ourselves in was now narrower and colder. The walls were bare, the graffiti was gone. A stairwell yawned open in front of us, leading down to the basement level. I did not like the idea of going further, especially into a basement, but what choice did we have? The only other option was going back the way we came, and we knew what was waiting for us there. Without speaking, we started our descent down the stairs. It was pitch black below. Our flashlights barely even cut through the dark, but it revealed this long hallway lined up with closed doors. Unlike the disaster upstairs, this part of the strip mall looked fairly intact. No trash, no broken glass, just a hallway of featureless office doors stretching off into the dark. "This is weird," Cody whispered. He was right. We inched forward, stopping at the first door, light leaking from the crack at the bottom. Someone was inside. I pressed my ear to the wood listening. Voices, low murmurs. I couldn't quite make out the words, but the cadence was wrong, rhythmic and structured like a scripture being read out loud. Wes grabbed the handle and turned it slightly. It was locked. We moved to the next door, same thing. Then another, same thing. But the fourth door was open. Again, I don't know why we did it, but we did. Curiosity, stupidity, probably both. We pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. It was an office, not an abandoned one and not a decayed one, just a forgotten room like the rest of the mall. This was functional. There were desks everywhere, chairs, filing cabinets, papers stacked neatly on surfaces, monitors glowing with data that we couldn't understand. This place was in use. "Dude, what the fuck is this?" Cody said. We stepped inside, drawn to one of the monitors. The screen was filled with the command prompt, walls of text scrolling too fast to read. The keyboard was locked and unresponsive. "This isn't," Wes started to say, but the computer screen flashed. The text disappeared, replaced with a single word: logged. We then heard movement from the hallway, a door opening, then another. Footsteps. Wes backed away from the desk, eyes wide. "We need to go now. Nobody waited. We turned and ran. Back through the dark hallway and back to the stairwell. Footsteps were pounding behind us, fast and heavy. They weren't running, they were chasing. Cody was the first up the stairs, scrambling towards the door at the top. It was a fire exit, rusted and warped, but when he slammed into it, it gave way, bursting open to the night air. We spilled off into the parking lot, gasping for air, the cold wind slapping against our sweat-soaked skin. I turned around to look, but nobody was following. We turned back towards the door that we'd come through, half expecting somebody to step out after us, but there was nothing, no movement, no other sounds, just the gaping black doorway leading back into something that we probably never should have found. As we stood there, hands on our knees catching our breath, we then saw something that made my stomach lurch. The offices, the underground level, the desks, the glowing screen, the locked files, they were still there. But a week later, when we came back, it was empty. And not just abandoned, I mean scrubbed. Every desk was gone, every chair had been removed, every document shredded or burned. The monitors had been pulled from the walls, leaving only dark outlines on the cheap office paneling. Whatever the hell operation had been running down there, it was active. Somebody had been working there, running something they needed to stay secret. When they realized somebody had found it, they didn't just leave, they erased everything, like it never existed in the first place. After the second time we went back, we didn't really talk much about it. Not on the ride home, and not in the days that followed. None of us really wanted to be the one to say it out loud, to admit that we'd stumbled into something that wasn't meant to be found. But the thoughts lingered, nagging at the edges of my mind. What was that, and who worked there? And more importantly, why the hell was it buried under an abandoned strip mall? A week later, curiosity got the best of us, and Wes suggested we go back, just to look, not go explore, not push our luck, just see if the place was still there. Cody wasn't thrilled about the idea, but he agreed, and I didn't find myself arguing. Curiosity had gotten the best of me. I needed to know, even if I didn't want to admit it. We returned just after dark, parking down the street and cutting off through the overgrown lot. The strip mall stood there, looking the same, ruined, desolate, forgotten. The stairwell was still there, still leading down. But the moment we stepped inside, I felt it, and I know they did too. The air was empty, no buzzing. This place was dead now, and not like before, when the basement felt eerily untouched and preserved. This time it smelled like dust, like the stale breath of something that had been dead for years and years. We made our way back down the hall. We found the doors again, but this time they were all open, every single one. And inside, the offices were empty. No desk, no computer, no stacks of paper, no monitors humming with unreadable codes. Just blank spaces where everything had been. The walls still bore faint outlines where the furniture had been pressed against them, but outside of that, nothing else really remained. It wasn't just abandoned, it had been scrubbed. Wes and Cody used that word over and over and over. Cody swore under his breath, and Wes ran a hand over one of the desks, shaking his head. "They cleared out," he muttered, "really fast." I looked at the floor. There was no dust, no debris, no sign that anything had been moved violently. It was, or at least had to be, a controlled exit. Somebody had known that we were there, and they made sure no trace remained. And maybe that meant that they were monitoring. We left without another word, climbing back into the parking lot, our footsteps deafening in the empty space. And when we reached the street, I glanced back one last time. The strip mall stood silent, nothing but a relic of the past. But we knew the truth. It wasn't just a ruin. I really enjoyed going to places that I wasn't supposed to. Not in some kind of criminal way, at least not really. I just liked seeing parts of the world that had been forgotten and locked away, or left to rot. Some people listening to this, you might like hiking in the mountains, but I hike through places where people aren't supposed to go. The real thrill wasn't just the exploring, it was documenting it. I'd take pictures, recording everything. It wasn't enough to just see it. I needed to capture it and study it later. To me, that was part of the fun, watching the footage back later, catching little details that I'd missed in the moment. Shadows moving in the distance, strange shapes in the dark. Sometimes, or at least most of the time, it was just tricks of the light, but there were times it wasn't. A lot of the time, I just end up reading all the graffiti that I recorded. I've got archives of it. Most of my trips would take me underground. Abandoned tunnels, storm drains, dry water treatment plants. Anything that smelled of rust and old concrete. I'd crawl through pipe systems so tight that I've had to move on my stomach. Stood inside caverns so deep my flashlight barely even touched the ceiling. I'd seen graffiti from people who'd been there for decades, perhaps even a century before me. Messages from ghosts telling me I wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. But the best places, the real gold mines in my opinion, were the sites that still had things inside them. Objects left behind, machinery, offices with papers still scattered across desks. Places that felt like workers had just stood up and walked out one day, never to come back. So when I heard about this abandoned excavation site just outside of town, I knew I was gonna check it out. The rumor had come from this Urbex forum. Somebody mentioned an old equipment lot with a warehouse, a row of service sheds, and a bunch of machinery just sitting there untouched. It had been left behind for years, they said, after the company that owned it shut down. Sounded like my kind of place. I found the location on Google Maps, an old industrial road at the edge of a business park. Looked pretty promising, and from the satellite view, I could see a row of parked backhoes, a storage lot, and a large rectangular warehouse. The buildings were pretty weathered, the pavement cracked. Definitely abandoned. I packed fairly light, camera, flashlight, water bottle, and of course a crowbar just in case I needed to pry open a stubborn door. I dressed in dark clothes, nothing flashy. The less attention I drew, the better. Catching a charge is the quickest way to end this kind of hobby. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. The place was a lot bigger in person, stretching across a couple of acres of fenced-in land. The main warehouse loomed over the lot. Its windows were dark and corrugated metal walls rusting at the edges. The front gate was locked, but somebody had already cut through a section of the fence near the back. Perfect. I checked my gear and ducked through the gap and then slipped inside. The moment I stepped onto that property, I felt it, that strange electric hum in the air. Something wasn't right. I moved carefully, keeping my footsteps light as I crossed the cracked pavement. The air had the scent of old oil and rust, the distinct industrial stink that never really fades. It was a ghost town though, not a soul around, and even better than that, no cameras. These were all good signs for an evening ahead of me. The warehouse was going to be my first stop. If there was anything good to find, it had to be in there. I switched on my camera and started recording, sweeping the lens over the building's exterior, getting some establishing shots. I checked my watch and then started in. The main door was locked, but the side entrance had been forced open at some point. The handle was twisted off, the frame bent inward. Somebody had been here before me, no surprise. Places like this always attracted people just like me. Shoot, I found this place on an internet forum, so hundreds of people had likely already been through here. Inside that space was massive, a cavern of steel and shadows. Moonlight trickled in through the broken skylights, painting the concrete floor inside these streaks. Rows and rows of rusted shelves lined the walls, stacked with old tools, coiled up cables, plastic crates full of God knows what. The air was thick with dust, undisturbed for years. I moved deeper, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. The warehouse was a mess of abandoned workstations, toppled over filing cabinets, desks with their drawers yanked out. Papers were strewn all across the floor, curling at the edges with all the age. I picked up one and squinted at the faded text, an invoice dated from 2 years ago. The place hadn't been empty as long as people thought. I continued filming, narrating quietly as I walked. Looks like an old workshop, maybe storage for heavy equipment maintenance. A lot of the paperwork is fairly recent. Maybe the company went under, or maybe they just relocated. Either way, the place is in rough shape, but evidence says otherwise. As I was narrating to my camera, a clatter echoed off somewhere in the dark, and I immediately froze. It wasn't like a super loud noise, but enough, like something small had been knocked over. Not a fun thing to hear inside these places, and I'm usually not the one to get easily spooked, but the quickest way to get me sweating is to hear a sound from somewhere off in the dark. I've quickly panned my flashlight toward the sound, heart beating a little faster. Nothing, just more overturned chairs and scattered debris. I guess it could have easily been a rat. Could have been the building settling, something like that. Or I guess it could have been something else. I didn't like that thought, so I pressed on. The further I went in, the worse the air would get. It was so damp and stale. The whole building was just feeling wrong, like it was ready to flip the lights on and call security on me. I kept my eyes peeled, constantly looking over my shoulder, but I continued moving deeper and deeper inside the building. And then I heard another sound, almost like a tap, 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 rhythmic, structured. Super weird to hear in here. It came from somewhere past the rows of shelving, deeper inside the warehouse's belly. It was metered out to a point that I was sure it was made by something living. I didn't call out, I'm not an idiot. If somebody was indeed inside here, I wasn't about to let them know that I was too. Instead, I just moved slowly, creeping forward and listening. Nothing. I filmed everything. Even if I didn't see anything now, maybe I'd catch something later in the footage. After a few more minutes, I decided, alright, I've seen enough. This place is pretty eerie, sure, but nothing outright dangerous. It's time to go check out the equipment yard. I slipped back outside, my breath fogging in the cool night air. Only 45 minutes had gone by, so there was plenty of time left and battery for poking around. Rows and rows of parked machinery stretched out in front of me. Bulldozers, backhoes, old dump trucks. They stood eerie in this formation. Cabins dark, metal shells streaked with rust. The first thing that I noticed was all the tires were aired up. That told me that these vehicles were still in use, right? I was starting to wonder just how abandoned exactly this place was. I then climbed up onto one of the bulldozers, swinging myself up into the driver's seat. The windshield was smeared with grime, interior coated in dust. I panned my camera over the dashboard, the levers, the faded company logo on the door. And then a faint shuffling noise reached my ears. I tensed up and scanned the yard, but I didn't see anything. Why were there constantly noises everywhere I went? Was something following me? I used my camera to zoom in around the property, really taking my time looking around, but nothing popped up still. I climbed down and moved on to the next vehicle, filmed the tires, the undercarriage, the empty fuel tank. Again, I quietly narrated all this for later. And again, I heard more shuffling, but this time it was closer. I stopped talking and listened, and this time I actually heard it once more. I swung my camera immediately toward the sound, but there was nothing to be seen. And that's when a cold unease crept up my spine. I'm not alone, and I know that now. And yet, nobody was confronting me. No footsteps rushing toward me, no voices shouting at me to get out, to leave. Just that faint, intermittent shuffling, moving when I moved. I swallowed up my panic, gripping my camera tighter. If somebody was here, they were watching me, and they weren't in a hurry to let me know that either. I kept moving, forcing myself to remain calm and record everything. I checked out a few service sheds, a storage unit full of old tires. I kept my ears sharp, listening, tracking those subtle sounds around me. Then I saw a trailer office, set apart from the other buildings. The windows were covered, but a dim glow was seeping through the gaps in the blinds. There was a light on inside. I turned my flashlight off, crouching low and just watching. If this place was truly abandoned, then why the hell was there power running that trailer? Why was everything so well kept? Sure, a little dust here and there, but that was pretty common inside quarries and rock yards. I then took a step closer, careful to keep to the shadows. My camera was still recording, red light blinking softly inside the dark. Through the dirty glass, I could see movement inside, a figure shifting just out of sight. My mouth went dry. This wasn't some dead site left to decay. Somebody was working here, or at very least, somebody still maintaining it. That realization hit me like a sucker punch. I wasn't exploring an abandoned lot. I was trespassing. This was a nightmare scenario for me. Whoever was inside that trailer might not take kindly to uninvited guests. Panic then surged in my gut. I need to go, now. I powered down my camera and shoved it into my bag, then turned back toward the fence. Then I heard the low creak, an unmistakable sound of a door opening. I didn't look back and I didn't stop. I walked fast, every instinct screaming at me to now run, but I forced myself to keep my pace, keep it even. Running made a lot of noise, and running would get you caught. I reached the fence and slipped back through the gap, made my way back to the main road without breaking any stride. I didn't stop until I was at my car, didn't take my camera out, didn't look back at the property, just got in, turned the key, and drove. The whole time, my hands were ice on the wheel. I was not alone in there. Somebody had been walking around the area, seemingly aware of my presence. But were they following me, watching every move, and whoever they were, they let me leave. But I don't think they would have let me leave twice. For the next few days, I did what I always did after these excursions. I went through the footage, frame by frame, looking for details that I missed when I was in there. I expected to see the usual oddities. Strange shadows, flickers of movement that could easily be chalked up to dust or shifting light. What I wasn't expecting was a person. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Inside the warehouse footage, as I panned my camera over the rows of shelving, there was a shape in the far background, barely visible inside the low light. A figure, tall and thin, standing still. When I rewound and played it over, I saw it more clearly. The head was slightly tilted as if it was watching me. The moment my camera moved, the figure then stepped back and just melted off into the darkness. A slow creeping dread then settled over me. I scrubbed through the video, checking every second of every frame. I found him again near the equipment yard. As I climbed onto that bulldozer, the camera caught a brief flash of movement between two parked backhoes. Someone moving, crouching and staying low. I rewound it again and again. He followed me the whole time. That final confirmation came when I analyzed the footage outside that office trailer. As I crept toward the building, the camera caught something that I hadn't seen in person. A shadow just at the edge of the light, standing near the trailer's corner. The figure was much closer this time, the closest he had ever been. And then as I turned and walked away, the shadow moved, following in sync with my retreat. I shut my laptop and sat back, skin going cold. Someone had been out there that whole time, not just watching me, but tracking me, staying hidden and just waiting. The only reason I hadn't ended up in a hospital or worse was because I left when I did. And then maybe a week later, after all of this had happened, after I left, a story broke. 2 local teens had gone to that same site after hearing the same rumor that I had. They weren't as lucky. A security guard caught them trespassing, beat them so badly they needed medical attention. No charges were filed, no arrests were made, but as far as I know, and as the law was concerned, they'd broken in, and the guard had every right to use the force he did. I thought about my footage, about the man lurking in the dark, and realized just how close I'd been to meeting him face to face that night. I never went back. He put a beat down on those kids that was jail yard status. I'm talking dental work, lifelong issues, and it could have easily been me. I never really considered myself the urban explorer type. It was really more Manny's thing. He had this itch for slipping into forgotten places and peeling back the layers of a city most people didn't care to even see. This kid, I'm telling you, could conquer anything: spiders, rats, human excrement, old factories, train yards, houses that were condemned and left to rot. Manny wanted to see them all. But me, I just liked hanging out. And I guess if that meant crawling through a hole in a fence now and again, then so be it. Oklahoma City had its share of places to sneak up into. Tornadoes had done a number on plenty of buildings over the years, and there were entire streets where the houses stood blackened from old fires or flood damaged. Now stood abandoned to squatters and stray dogs. We'd heard about everything from sunken train cars to empty hospitals, and Manny was always talking about the next big spot. He was hooked, and it was actually easy to admire. He would also put a lot of thought into each and every trip. One night, he called me up, hyped about some place downtown.
Dude, did you hear about that call center, the abandoned one?
I hadn't heard about it.
Bro, it's downtown, totally empty. Some company bailed on it last year and just up and left. But get this.
His voice dropped down to this conspiratorial whisper.
The power's still on. Luke was telling me about it last night.
I leaned back in my chair and pressed the phone to my ear. What do you mean the power's still on?
I mean exactly what I said. People have been inside, said the lights are still on. Everything's been stripped, but the place still has juice, and nobody knows why.
I exhaled, shaking my head. That doesn't mean we should be the ones to find out, though, does it?
Come on, dude. It's just an office building. There's no ghosts, no bullshit, just a weird oversight. I say we check it out.
Manny was really good at being convincing. He just had this way of making everything sound like an adventure, even if it was literally just climbing up into a half-collapsed school to look at some graffiti. Besides, I guess it's not really like I had anything better to do. So, we went. I'd say it took us about an hour to actually find the place. It was this old brick building sandwiched between taller structures, and its sign had long been gone. The windows were shuttered, but just like Manny had said, light leaked through the closed blinds, strips of sickly yellow casting thin bars onto the sidewalks below. "You seen this?" Manny murmured. I just nodded. The place should have been dark, dead, but instead, it was glowing. We circled the building, avoiding the front entrance. The city wasn't exactly known for its strict security, but that didn't mean we wanted to push our luck. Most abandoned buildings had a way in somewhere, some loose boards, a broken window, busted locks, somewhere. You could find your way inside. Sure enough, the back had a service door that was slightly ajar. Manny pressed a hand against it and grinned when it gave way. "After you, sweetheart," he whispered. I hesitated, then stepped inside. It smelled like mildew and something else, something rotten, like food left to spoil inside a sealed room. Almost like dirty sex and alcohol. The walls were torn up, the carpet shredded and stained. Empty cans, crusted food bags littered every corner. The place was honestly pretty gross, but I guess nothing we really hadn't seen before. Plus, we weren't the first ones who got here. And something told me we wouldn't be the last. It's just the way of the gun when it comes to urban exploring. Manny stepped in beside me, letting the door close with a soft click. That space felt wrong immediately, like it went completely dead silent. And I've been to plenty of places that had similar effects, but this one was just different. The air hung thick with mildew and what smelled like old electrical fires. I think we were standing in what once must have been the reception area. The drywall had been punched through in places, exposing the wooden beams and stripped wiring. A filthy couch was slumped over in one corner, its stuffing spilling out onto the floor. I counted 3 busted light fixtures overhead, their covers shattered and bulbs long gone. But beyond the wreckage, a faint yellow glow pulsed from deeper inside the building. Manny then clicked on his flashlight. "Dude, this place is wrecked," he muttered, stepping over a pile of old clothes. "It looks like there were some people definitely crashing here for a while." I just followed him, keeping my breath shallow. I've been inside abandoned buildings before, but this one just really had this different energy to it. Not that usual stale emptiness. This place actually felt occupied. And we weren't even really into the real meat of the building yet. It looked like an eternal flophouse. Why hadn't these people spread out? If it was this huge of a building, it was as if they just wanted to crowd into the first 100 square feet of it, which was strange to me. The main hall stretched out in front of us, wide and open, and very much unlived in. Rows of cubicles must have filled the space out, but all that remained were scattered chairs and a few broken desks. The walls were lined with these square whiteboards, some leaning, others still bolted in place. covered in dry erase scribbles so faint I could barely even read them. And I mean, there were piles of things everywhere, hundreds of them. Manny stepped ahead of me, clicking his flashlight off. Guess whoever looted this place didn't really care about the chairs, he joked. I didn't laugh though. But I will admit, it was nice to be in a well-lit room for a change. Usually, our trips were in total darkness. Honestly, it was the silence that would get to me. The city had a sound, even at night. Distant traffic, occasional sirens, hum of the streetlights. But inside this building, there was just nothing. Just the low buzz of the still active fluorescent lights flickering above, casting these eerie, flickering lights over the office ruins. We moved deeper. The main room was a dead end, just a husk of whatever it used to be, so we veered off into one of the side corridors. The air was heavier the further we walked, warmer and more stagnant. I felt sweat beat up on my neck. We passed empty offices, mostly stripped to the bones, carpets peeled back, their doors hanging on loose hinges. Some of the rooms held signs of life: dirty blankets, makeshift beds, stacks of old food wrappers, homeless camps probably. It started to make sense why nobody lived in the main room. It was far too bright. It'd be hard to sleep underneath that non-stop bulbage. And that's when we stumbled upon something different. A door at the end of the hall. Unlike any of the others, it was still intact, undamaged, as if nobody had even tried to get through. But more importantly, we heard a sound. This rhythmic muffled noise from the opposite side. Manny and I immediately froze. "You hear that?" I whispered to him. He just nodded, stepping closer and pressing his ear against the door. A low looping melody was humming from the inside. I just frowned. What the hell is that? Manny just shrugged. Maybe it's some kind of motion-activated speaker or a radio? I didn't like it. Everything about this place was just wrong, but now this was the wrongest of all of it. The silence creeped me out so badly, but now there was just this noise, and for some reason I wanted to throw up. Whatever it was, I wanted no part of it. Manny tried the handle. It turned, and the door slowly creaked open. The room beyond was dimly lit by this single flickering bulb. And at first I thought the movement in the shadows was the light playing tricks on me, but then I realized, no, they were dancing. Two figures, thin and ragged, swaying in slow motion. Their limbs were moving at these unnatural angles, like the people you'd see nodding off on fentanyl videos. Their heads were lolling back. Both of their mouths were half open. Their eyes, oh my God, their eyes were rolled white and just empty in their sockets. Faces slick with sweat and grime. The music was not coming from a speaker, it was one of them, humming, low and monotonous, over and over. The air in here stank even worse than the rest of the building. Unwashed body scent, something sour and chemical underneath it. I could even taste it in my tongue. Meth, crack, something else I'm sure. Manny and I just stood frozen in the doorway, watching these two drugged out figures perform their eerie swaying ritual beneath that weak buzzing light. They didn't even see us, they didn't react, and they didn't stop. I reached out and grabbed Manny's sleeve and tugged on it. "We need to go." Slowly, very slowly, we eased the door shut. I held my breath. Nothing changed. The humming, the swaying, it all continued uninterrupted. Manny grabbed my arm and we backed away, moving faster now, retracing our steps through those darkened halls. Every room, every open doorway felt like a mouth waiting to swallow us up whole. By the time we finally make it back to the main room, my heart was hammering against my ribs. And that's when we heard movement. Manny grabbed my shoulder and yanked me behind one of the few remaining desks. Two men entered from the opposite hallway, and they weren't the dancers. They were rummaging through the debris, digging through piles of abandoned belongings, muttering to one another in these low voices. These guys were sharp, coherent, probably dangerous. I held my breath, willing myself not to move. not to make any sound. Manny leaned in. "To get out," he whispered to me, and I just nodded. The only way out that I knew was back the way we came, which meant we had to get past them. I could feel the weight of every sound, the soft scuff of shoes, the rustling of fabric. The room really wasn't that big, and if either of those guys turned around, they'd see us immediately. Manny made the first move, slipping between the shadows. I followed, pulse thundering in my ears. Every step felt like an eternity. The place was brighter than hell, so we had to hug the far wall and cling to what few shadows were even there. We were halfway there when one of the men stopped rummaging. He turned his head and his eyes narrowed, halfway looking over his shoulder. I froze and Manny did too. Then, as if losing interest, he shrugged and went back to digging through the trash. This time we moved a little faster, slipping past the ruined cubicles and darting towards that hallway. Once we hit the service door, neither of us looked back. We pushed out through the alley, the night air hitting us like a slap in the face. I sucked in a breath and turned to Manny, and then, behind him, people, pouring out of nowhere, filing into the abandoned building. It was like somebody hit a dinner bell that only they could hear. Silent shapes moving through the dark, dozens of them, slipping from the building like rats out of a nest. They walked with a purpose. Most of their faces were covered in shadow, their eyes locked straight ahead, all heading in the same direction. Back inside they went. Manny just grabbed my wrist and motioned. "Let's go." I didn't argue. We hurried back to the street, and when I looked back one more time, the alley was empty. The building sat quiet and the blinds were still drawn, that yellow glow spilling out through the cracks. I just couldn't shake the thought. Who the hell was paying this electric bill? We didn't stop walking until we hit that main road, and only then did we let ourselves take a breath, hands on our knees, sucking in that crisp night air. My skin was clammy, and my shirt was sticking to my back. Manny was the first one to speak up. "Dude, what the hell was that?" I just shook my head. I don't know, and I don't really think I want to know. We both turned and stared back toward the alley. From here, the building looked fairly normal, just another forgotten husk in the city's decaying core. Nothing about it suggested that dozens of people had slipped inside just a few minutes ago, but we saw them. Manny ran a hand through his hair and paced in this tight circle. "All right, I guess if you think about it, the lights are still on, and the place should be condemned, but it's not. And that," he motioned back towards the alley, exhaling sharply, "that wasn't normal." I just remained quiet because he was right. I'd seen homeless encampments before, but that couldn't have been that. These people weren't just squatting, they were moving with intent, like they belonged there, like they paid the bill themselves. Could that even be possible, or was it a setup of some kind? It literally felt like something was drawing them in there. I shivered and suddenly felt too exposed out there on that empty street. Look, man, I don't know what's going on in there, but I don't think it's some junkies just looking for shelter. There's something else. Manny nodded. Maybe the city knows, and maybe they want them in there. That thought for some reason made my stomach flip round. Like moths to a flame, literally. They sacrifice one building and it keeps what, like 100 homeless off the street? I guess that was kind of an interesting conspiracy. We stood there for a while longer, watching the building in silence. No movement, no figures in the window, just that same dim light bleeding off through the cracks. Eventually, not long after, we left, and neither of us spoke about calling the cops or doing anything like that, because what the hell would we even say? We broke into a building full of people who weren't supposed to be there, that there were some cracked out dancers in a back room and more vagrants that could be slipping in like they were part of some silent pilgrimage? No, because nobody would believe us, and nobody had mentioned anything like this in our lead up to the exploration, so frankly, I knew nobody was talking about it. It's best to just shut up and take the L. and explore a lot less trafficked areas in the future. We were so close to getting caught, and if that happened, I really don't know what would have happened to us. We might still be in there, tied up to some rusted out water heater. Who knows? I started off pretty young, sneaking into abandoned houses, shuttered gas stations, forgotten factories, just to see what was left behind. It was a rush, a thrill, walking through places that were frozen in time, untouched by the world for years and years, sometimes even decades. There's just something eerie about it, something that would make your skin prickle. I told myself, it's just my imagination, and that was at least until one night, and when I brought my girlfriend along with me. Supposed to be a fairly simple trip, just another old property on the outskirts of town. A ranch that had been abandoned for as long as anybody could remember. Nobody knew why. Rumors spread round, some saying the owners packed up and left without a word. Others swore there'd been some kind of accident. Whatever the case, the land was sitting empty, overgrown and forgotten. A sprawling ranch house with a dozen outbuildings left to rot. It was perfect. She was nervous, but I convinced her. "Babe, it's just a house," I said. "A barn, a stable. Nobody's lived there for years." But I was wrong. That night, I learned something about the world, about how fast things can go sideways, about how fragile life truly is. Because that night, we weren't alone. I still don't know how close we came to dying out there, but it was closer than I ever want to be again. We got to the ranch just after sunset. The sky was painted deep orange and violet. The place was a lot bigger than I expected it to be, and the house sat at the center of the property, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch, flanked by this massive barn, a stable, and a scattering of sheds. The garage shop, which was easily the size of a small warehouse, loomed off to one side. The whole area was overgrown, weeds sprouting from the cracks in the driveway, fence leaning, brittle with age. No signs of life, no tire tracks, no footprints, just empty land and buildings that should have been falling apart by now. No animals, no agriculture, just dust and shadows. I gripped my girlfriend's hand as we walked up those front steps. The wood groaned underneath our weight, and she hesitated. "Are you sure nobody lives here?" I nodded. "I mean, look at it. It's been abandoned forever. Come on." The front door was unlocked, and I pushed it open. The scent of dust and aged wood rushed out to greet us. Inside, it was like literally stepping into the past. The furniture was still in place. The bed upstairs was still made. Books sat neatly on the shelves, their pages yellowed but undisturbed. The china in the kitchen cabinets was arranged like somebody had just finished setting the table for dinner, and it never happened. "This is really weird," she said. I couldn't help but agree. Places like this usually get ransacked, stripped for valuables, but this house, it was pristine. Like the owners stepped out for groceries and literally never came back. We moved from room to room, careful, almost reverent. There were old family portraits up on the walls, faces staring down at us with that glassy black and white stillness. A lifetime captured and abandoned. We didn't stay long. The air felt awkward, like we were intruding on something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I snapped a few photos, but even looking through the lens, I felt like something was watching us. I was fairly used to exploring truly abandoned places that had never been lived in, but this one was definitely different. It felt like a personal violation. We stepped back outside and the night deepened, crickets growing louder. I led us towards the other buildings, starting up with the garage shop. It was filled with tools, tractors, half disassembled engines. Again, this place was untouched, no sign of looting. A full set of wrenches lay on a workbench arranged by size. I ran a hand over the layer of dust covering them. Someone used to take care of this place, and then one day they just stopped. Next, we headed over to the stable. Empty stalls and rotted hay. The air was thick with the smell of decay, but it wasn't recent. Whatever had died in here had died a long time ago. Finally, we approached the barn. It was massive. The sliding doors were slightly ajar. The darkness within it was so thick, it looked like a solid object, a jelly or a paste of some kind. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight and then stepped inside. The interior stretched out before us, towering wooden beams arching over this cavernous space. Old farm equipment rusted in the corners. Stacks of rotting hay sat in uneven piles. We wandered through, my phone's light sweeping across walls lined with rusted tools, coils of rope, hanging from the rafters like vines. My girlfriend remained close, her fingers gripping the back of my shirt. And that's when we both heard this faint scraping sound coming from the far end of the barn. We froze. I swept the light toward the sound, but didn't see anything, just more tools, more hay, and more shadows. "Calm down, it's probably just a rat," I whispered, though I didn't even believe it. We kept moving, stepping carefully over loose boards. Then that sound came round again, closer. My girlfriend sucked in a sharp breath, and I could feel her heartbeat against my back. And then, another sound, a whisper of movement above us. I lifted my light, aiming at the rafters. Long, thick ropes dangled from the beams, swaying slightly in the draft. I reached up, fingers brushing against one, and tugged. A snap, a creak of the wood, and then a pallet full of bricks came crashing down between us. The impact sent dust and splinters exploding into the air. My girlfriend screamed, and I stumbled back. My flashlight then tumbled from my grip, spinning across the floor. More things began to fall, wooden planks, rusted tools, debris that had no reason to be up there in the first place. It felt as though somebody had rigged it. I grabbed her arm and pulled her towards the exit. My heart exploded as more and more objects rained down, barely missing us. A jagged metal tool clattered inches from my foot. A bunch of 9-inch nails fell from such a high point they stuck in the ground on impact. We burst out of the barn, gasping for breath. I turned back, and just for a split second, a shadow shifted in the rafters. I didn't wait to see any more. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and we took off. We sprinted the property towards the far edge where the old dirt road cut through the trees. My mind raced, piecing everything together. The untouched house, the stocked garage, the booby-trapped barn. Somebody was still here, or at least they didn't want anybody else coming around. We slowed as we neared the tree line, panting, bent over, trying to catch our breath. And that's when we heard the sound of a deep, throaty rumble of an engine. I turned towards the sound, heart pounding. The noise was distant, but getting closer and closer. A truck moving slowly, creeping along one of the many dirt roads leading toward the ranch. Its engine idled and then roared off into the night. No headlights, just the distant glow of its taillights reflecting off the trees as it moved through the darkness. "They're coming this way," my girlfriend whispered. "Who is it?" I just shook my head. We needed to go. We dove into the trees and pushed through the undergrowth, crouching low behind this fallen log. The truck's engine grew louder and louder, its low growl cutting through the night like a blade. I peered through the branches and held my breath as I looked on. The truck rolled past us, slow, its massive tires crunching over the gravel and dead leaves. It was an old blacked-out 4x4, the kind built for some kind of rough terrain. The headlights remained off, its driver only visible as this hunched shadow behind the wheel. I could see movement in the truck bed, someone else shifting and adjusting, and not just one person, but two. They weren't here by accident, and there was 20 or 30-foot long chains hanging from the rear bumper, this ominous threat of violence. I pressed my hand against my girlfriend's back, silently telling her to not move, don't breathe, don't even think about running. The truck rumbled on up to the ranch, pulling through the sagging metal gate. It idled for a brief moment, then the driver killed the engine and a door creaked open. Silence, and then a voice, law and drawing, amused. "You hear that?" Felt my blood turn to ice. They had heard us, but how? We hadn't made a sound compared to that truck. A second voice, deeper and rougher. "Nah, something spooked the dog though. Could be anything." They stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then the first voice chuckled. "Ain't nothing. Come on, let's check the lab." We didn't wait for any more. As soon as their footsteps faded, we moved, low and silent, slipping through the trees until we reached the road. And then we ran. And we never went back. By the time we got back to the car, we had pieced out our own theories together. They were squatters, drug makers of some kind, and they were using the property to produce something. We ended up calling the cops and told them our story, but because we were technically trespassing, they took the whole thing with a grain of salt. I never heard any more about a bust or anything, and well, neither of us are brave enough to go back and look for ourselves. So unless they make a big announcement, I guess we'll never know.